when the stagecoach rolled into Wilcox, Arizona Territory on that scorching August afternoon in 1882. Elias Edwards stood waiting with his hat in his hands and his heart somewhere in his throat, watching a woman in a dusty blue traveling dress step down onto the sun-baked earth with fingers stained the color of ink and berries. She was not what he had expected, though he could not say exactly what he had expected from a mail-order bride. Her auburn hair was pinned up under a simple bonnet, and her face was flushed from the heat and the journey. But it was her hands that caught his attention first, those slender fingers marked with dark stains that looked almost purple in the afternoon light. She clutched a worn carpetbag in one hand and a leather-bound book in the other, and when her eyes met his across the dusty street, something in his chest tightened. "Miss Sarah Ramsey?" he asked, stepping forward with what he hoped was a reassuring smile. She nodded, and he saw the exhaustion in her green eyes, the wariness of a woman who had traveled far on faith alone. "Mr. Edwards, Elias," he said quickly. "Please, just Elias, welcome to Wilcox." He gestured toward her hands, curiosity getting the better of him. "Those stains. Are you hurt?" A small smile touched her lips, the first sign of warmth he had seen from her. "No, not hurt, I write. These are ink stains. I've been documenting my journey from Missouri, and the ink I use is made from pokeweed berries. It is less expensive than store-bought, but it marks the skin something fierce. You write." The words came out with more interest than he had intended to show so soon, but the revelation intrigued him. Most women he knew could read and write, of course, but few spoke of it with such casual ownership. "I do." She straightened her spine, and he saw a flicker of defiance in her expression, as if she expected him to object. "I have kept journals since I was 12 years old." "I hope that will not be a problem." "No," he said, surprised to find he meant it. "No problem at all, in fact." He paused, uncertain whether to voice the thought that had suddenly occurred to him, but honesty had always been his way, even when it made him vulnerable. "I was hoping, actually, that perhaps you might document our romance. If we have one, that is. It seems a fine thing to have a record of how two people come to know each other." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could not read the expression on her face. Then, slowly, she smiled, and it transformed her entire countenance. "That is perhaps the most unusual request I have ever received, Mr. Edwards. But yes, I think I would like that very much." The ride out to his ranch took just over an hour, and Elias used the time to tell her about the land, the cattle, the life she could expect. His ranch was not the largest in the territory, but it was his, built with his own hands and the help of good men. 2,000 acres of grassland and scrub, with a creek that ran year-round and a small herd of 300 cattle. He had a foreman named Tom, 2 regular hands, and a woman named Rosa who came twice a week to help with the heavy cleaning. Sarah listened quietly, occasionally asking questions that showed she was paying attention. She wanted to know about the water rights, about the relationship with neighboring ranches, about the town and its people. Smart questions, practical questions, and Elias found himself relaxing into the conversation. "Why did you send for a bride?" she asked finally, as the ranch house came into view. It was a simple structure, wood and stone, with a wide porch that faced west to catch the evening breeze. A man with property like this must have had opportunities locally. He considered how to answer, wanting to be truthful but not wanting to burden her with his loneliness. "Wilcox is a small town, and I have known most of the women here since they were children. It did not feel right, courting someone I had watched grow up. And the few women who have come through as adults, well, they were looking for something different than what I could offer. A doctor, maybe, or a banker. Someone who spends their days in clean clothes and does not smell of cattle. And you thought a desperate woman from Missouri would be less particular. There was no anger in her voice, only curiosity and perhaps a hint of amusement. I thought a woman from Missouri might appreciate a man who keeps his word and works hard, he replied. And I hoped she might be someone who wanted a partnership, not just a provider. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I am not desperate, Mr. Edwards, but I am practical. My father died last year and my mother the year before that. I have 2 younger sisters who have married well and a brother who inherited the family farm. I could have stayed and lived on his charity, but I have never been comfortable with dependence. So yes, I answered your advertisement, and I came here with my eyes open. I am willing to work for a life of my own." "Fair enough," he said, and meant it. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "We will take things slow if that suits you. Get to know each other properly before we make any permanent decisions." "That would suit me very well," she said, and he saw relief in her expression. He helped her down from the wagon, and she stood for a moment looking at the house, the barn, the endless stretch of land under the wide Arizona sky. "It is so different from Missouri," she said softly. "So much space. So much light. Does it disappoint you?" "No." She turned to him with a smile. "No, I think it might be exactly what I needed." That first evening, after he had shown her to the bedroom that would be hers alone until she decided otherwise, after they had shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread that he apologized for, and she praised generously, she sat at the table with her leather-bound book and began to write. Elias watched her from where he sat near the fireplace, mending a bridle that had broken that morning. The lamplight caught in her hair, turning it to copper and gold, and her face had a look of peaceful concentration as she worked. The scratching of her pen against paper was a soothing sound, and he found himself content just to share the space with her. "What are you writing?" he asked after a while. She looked up, and there was ink on her fingertip where she had touched the page. "About today. About arriving in Wilcox and meeting you and seeing this place for the first time. About your unusual request that I document our romance." "Is there a romance to document yet?" He tried to keep his tone light, but he was genuinely curious about her thoughts. "There is the beginning of one, perhaps," she said carefully. "You have been kind and respectful and honest. That is a better start than many women receive." "I have no interest in being a tyrant," he said. "I have seen what that does to a marriage, how it hollows out both people involved. My parents, they were true partners. They respected each other, relied on each other. That is what I want. Your parents are gone." Her voice was gentle, and he appreciated that she did not dance around the subject. "My mother died when I was 15. My father lasted another 10 years before his heart gave out. He built this ranch from nothing, and I have been working to expand it, to make it something that would make him proud." "I think he would be proud," Sarah said. "From what I have seen, you have built something solid here. Something that will last." He felt a warmth in his chest at her words, and he realized with some surprise that her good opinion mattered to him. They had known each other for only a few hours, but already he found himself wanting to impress her, to show her that he was worthy of the faith she had shown in coming here. The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt surprisingly natural. Elias woke before dawn to work with the cattle, and Sarah rose with him to make breakfast. She was a competent cook, better than him by far, and she seemed to take satisfaction in providing good meals. In the mornings after he left, she would clean and organize the house, and he would return at midday to find small improvements everywhere he looked. Curtains washed and hung to dry in the sun. Shelves reorganized with a logic he had never considered but immediately appreciated. Wildflowers in a jar on the table. In the afternoons, when the heat was at its worst, they would sit in the shade of the porch and talk. He learned that she had been a schoolteacher for 3 years before her father's death, that she loved reading above almost all other things, that she had a quick wit and a sharp tongue when provoked. She learned that he had never been farther east than Texas, that he loved the land with a fierceness that sometimes surprised even him, that he played the harmonica poorly, but with great enthusiasm. And every evening she would write in her journal, documenting the slow unfurling of their relationship with an attention to detail that both touched and intimidated him. "What will you do with all these words?" he asked one night, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival. "When the journals are full." "Keep them," she said simply. "Someday, when we are old, we can read them and remember what it was like when we were young and just beginning." "You sound very certain that there will be a someday," he said, and his heart beat faster as he waited for her response. She set down her pen and looked at him directly, and in the lamplight her eyes were very green. "I am certain that I want there to be a someday, Elias. These past 2 weeks have been good. You have been good. I find myself looking forward to the sound of your horse coming up the path each day, to the conversations we have, to the way you listen when I speak as if my words matter. That is not nothing." "It is not nothing," he agreed. His voice came out rougher than he intended, thick with emotion he was not quite ready to name. "I have been thinking the same, that perhaps we might make this permanent sooner rather than later, if you are willing." "How soon?" She was smiling now, and there was color in her cheeks. "The preacher comes through Wilcox once a month. He will be here again in 2 weeks. We could speak to him then, if you like." "I would like that very much," she said. He stood and crossed to where she sat, and for the first time since she had arrived he reached out and took her hand in his. The ink stains were still there on her fingers, darker now from 2 weeks of writing, and he found them beautiful. "Then we will be married in 2 weeks, Sarah Ramsey, and I promise you I will do everything in my power to make you happy." She stood as well, and then she did something that surprised him. She reached up and touched his face, her stained fingertips gentle against his jaw. "And I promise you the same, Elias Edwards." He kissed her then, a soft and careful kiss that tasted of coffee and hope, and when they drew apart, they were both smiling. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Sarah sewed herself a new dress from fabric that Elias bought in town, a soft cream color that made her hair look even richer. He cleaned up the house as best he could, made repairs to things he had been putting off, bought new sheets for the bed they would share. Tom, his foreman, teased him mercilessly about his sudden attention to domestic details, but there was genuine happiness in the older man's eyes. "It is good to see you settling down, boss," Tom said one afternoon as they worked together to fix a section of fence. "You have been alone too long." "It does not feel real yet," Elias admitted. "I keep expecting to wake up and find that she has changed her mind, that she has realized what a rough life this is, and decided to go back to Missouri." "That woman is not going anywhere," Tom said with certainty. "I have seen the way she looks at you when she thinks no one is watching. She is staying, and you are a lucky man." "I am," Elias agreed. "Luckier than I deserve, probably." The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in the small church in Wilcox, with Tom and Rosa serving as witnesses and a handful of neighbors in attendance. Sarah wore her cream-colored dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Rosa had helped her gather that morning. Elias wore his best suit, the one he had bought for his father's funeral and had not worn since, and tried to keep his hands from shaking as the preacher led them through their vows. When it came time to kiss his bride, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with all the tenderness and promise he possessed, and the small congregation erupted in applause. They were married. Sarah Ramsey had become Sarah Edwards, and the life he had been hoping for finally felt within reach. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Rosa had prepared a feast of roasted chicken and vegetables, and someone had brought a fiddle. They danced in the street as the sun set, and Elias held Sarah close and thought that he had never been happier. When they finally returned to the ranch well after dark, they were both flushed and laughing, and the awkwardness he had been dreading never materialized. They came together with a tenderness born of genuine affection, and if there was nervousness on both sides, there was also joy. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets with moonlight streaming through the window, Sarah traced the lines of his face with her ink-stained fingers and said, "I am going to write about this. About today, about how it felt to marry you. Is that all right?" "More than all right," he said. "I want you to write it all down, every moment. I want to remember this forever." "Then I will," she promised, and kissed him again. The weeks that followed were an adjustment for both of them as they learned to truly live as husband and wife. There were disagreements, of course, small conflicts over household management and how the ranch should be run. Sarah had opinions, and she was not shy about sharing them, which occasionally rankled Elias's sense of pride. But they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise and find solutions that satisfied them both. One particular argument arose when Sarah suggested that they needed to expand the garden significantly if they wanted to be more self-sufficient. Elias had protested that the current garden was adequate, that his time was better spent on the cattle. Sarah had countered that with a larger garden, they could preserve more food for winter and save money that could be invested back into the ranch. They had gone back and forth for the better part of an evening before finally reaching an agreement. Elias would help her clear and prepare a larger plot, and she would take primary responsibility for its maintenance. "You are a stubborn woman," he had said, but he was smiling. "And you are a stubborn man," she had replied. "We are well matched." The garden flourished under Sarah's care, and by October they had harvested enough vegetables to fill the root cellar and then some. She spent days canning and preserving, turning the kitchen into a fragrant workshop of steam and spice. Elias would come in from the range to find her red-faced and exhausted but triumphant, surrounded by rows of glass jars filled with tomatoes and beans and pickles. "I told you it would be worth it," she said, and he had to admit she was right. In November, as the weather began to cool, they received word that a band of cattle rustlers had been operating in the area. Elias increased the patrols on his land and made sure his hands were armed when they rode out. He did not tell Sarah the full extent of his worry, not wanting to frighten her, but she was not a fool. "Something is troubling you," she said one evening as they prepared for bed. "I can see it in the way you check the locks 3 times and keep your rifle closer than usual." He sighed and told her about the rustlers, about the 2 neighboring ranches that had lost cattle, about his fear that they might be next. "I will not let anyone take what we have built," he said fiercely, "but I also cannot be everywhere at once." "Then we will be vigilant together," she said. "Teach me to shoot properly. I know the basics, but I want to be able to defend this place if I need to." So he taught her, spending Sunday afternoons at makeshift targets set up behind the barn. She was a quick study, her hand steady and her eye good, and within a few weeks she could hit a target at 50 yards with his Winchester. It gave him some small measure of comfort to know that she could protect herself if something happened when he was not there. The rustlers never did come to their land. The territorial marshal organized a posse and tracked them down before they could strike again, and 3 men were arrested and sent to trial in Tucson. Life returned to normal, but Elias did not forget the fear he had felt, the helpless rage at the thought of someone threatening what he and Sarah were building together. Winter in Arizona Territory was mild compared to what Sarah had known in Missouri, but the nights were cold, and they spent many evenings huddled together near the fireplace. She would read aloud from books she had brought with her, stories and poetry that transported them to other worlds, and he would listen with his eyes closed and his arm around her shoulders, thinking that he had never been so content. Christmas came, and they exchanged simple gifts. He gave her a new journal, leather-bound with her initials pressed into the cover, and she gave him a scarf she had knitted in the evenings when he thought she was just sitting idle. "It is not much," she said, but he could see the care that had gone into every stitch. "It is perfect," he said, and kissed her. They made love that night with a slow, deep intensity, and afterward Sarah whispered that she thought she might be pregnant. "It is too early to be certain," she said, "but my courses are late, and I have been feeling strange in the mornings." Elias felt his heart expand in his chest, a sensation so powerful it was almost painful. "A baby," he said wonderingly, "our baby. Are you happy?" She sounded anxious, and he realized that he had not responded quickly enough. "Happy," he pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "Sarah, I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am grateful. I am everything all at once." She laughed, and he felt her relax against him. "Good, because I am feeling all of those things too." As winter gave way to spring, Sarah's pregnancy became undeniable. She bloomed with it, her skin glowing and her figure rounding in ways that Elias found achingly beautiful. He became almost comically protective, insisting that she not lift anything heavy, that she rest in the afternoons, that she eat enough for two. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, and only occasionally told him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I am healthy and strong. Everything will be fine." But he worried anyway because he could not help it. He had seen too many women die in childbirth, too many children buried before they could walk. The thought of losing Sarah, of losing this child they had created together, was unbearable. In April, Roser recommended a midwife named Martha who lived in Wilcox and had delivered half the babies in the county. Elias rode into town to meet her and was reassured by her calm competence and the way she answered all his questions without making him feel foolish. She agreed to come out to the ranch when Sarah's time came and to check on her regularly in the weeks leading up to the birth. "Your wife is healthy," Martha said after her first examination. "She is young and strong, and she is carrying the baby well. I see no reason to expect complications, but I will be there to help when the time comes." Sarah continued to write throughout her pregnancy, documenting the changes in her body, her fears and hopes for the child. The way Elias could not seem to stop touching her rounded belly and talking to the baby within. "Our child will know how much they were wanted," she said one evening, reading back some of what she had written. "They will know that we loved each other first, and that they were born from that love." "Read me more," Elias said, and she did, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. The baby came in late July, during the hottest part of the summer. Sarah's labor started just before dawn, and Elias sent Tom racing into town to fetch Martha while he stayed with his wife, holding her hand and trying not to panic as her contractions grew stronger and closer together. Martha arrived within 2 hours, took one look at the situation and calmly took charge. "First babies take their time," she said. "This could be a while. Elias, make yourself useful. Fetch water, keep the fire going, and stay out of the way unless I call for you." It was the longest day of Elias's life. He paced the length of the porch 1,000 times, hearing Sarah's cries from inside and feeling utterly helpless. Rosa arrived and went in to help, and Tom stayed with Elias, offering silent support and occasionally forcing him to drink water. "She is strong," Tom said. "She will get through this." "I know," Elias replied, but his hands shook when he tried to light a cigarette. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, a new sound emerged from the house: the thin, piercing wail of a newborn baby. Elias nearly fell over in his haste to get inside, and Martha met him at the door with a smile on her face. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, loud son, and your wife did beautifully." He pushed past her, not caring about manners, and found Sarah propped up in bed with a small bundle in her arms. She looked exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but when she saw him, she smiled the most radiant smile he had ever seen. "Come meet our son," she said. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny red-faced creature in her arms. The baby was still crying, little fists waving in the air, and Elias felt something shift fundamentally inside him. This was his son. His and Sarah's. A whole new person who had not existed before and now did, and they were responsible for him. "Can I hold him?" His voice came out as barely a whisper. "Of course." Sarah carefully transferred the baby into his arms, and Elias cradled him against his chest, marveling at how small and perfect he was. "What should we name him?" Sarah asked. They had discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, holding his son, Elias found that he knew. "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Michael Edwards." "Ethan," Sarah repeated, testing the name. "Yes, I like that very much." The baby quieted in his arms, and Elias sat down carefully on the edge of the bed, unwilling to let go of either of them. "Thank you," he said to Sarah, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming here, for marrying me, for giving me this. I love you so much." "I love you too," she said, and there were tears on her cheeks. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." The weeks after Ethan's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry, but also of profound joy. Elias had never known he could feel such fierce protectiveness, such overwhelming tenderness. He would stand over the cradle he had built and watch his son sleep, counting his breaths, reassuring himself that he was real and healthy and theirs. Sarah recovered quickly from the birth, and soon she was back to writing in her journal, now documenting Ethan's first weeks of life. "He smiled today," she would tell Elias excitedly, even though Elias suspected it was just gas. "He is the most brilliant, beautiful baby who has ever existed." "Naturally," Elias would agree, only half joking. "He takes after his mother." As summer faded into fall, they settled into new routines. Sarah wore the baby in a sling while she worked in the garden or around the house, and Elias would come home to find them both napping in the rocking chair, Sarah's hand protective on Ethan's small back. He loved those moments, the peaceful domesticity of them, the proof that this life he had built was real and solid. One evening in October, as they sat together on the porch with Ethan sleeping in Sarah's arms, she said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" Elias was half dozing, content, and comfortable. "I want to compile my journals into something more formal, not just random daily entries, but a proper account of our story, how we met, how we fell in love, how we built this life together. Something that Ethan can read when he is older and his children after him." Elias considered this. "That sounds like a lot of work." "It would be," she agreed. "But I think it would be worth it. Too many stories are lost because no one takes the time to write them down." "I do not want our story to be lost." "Then do it," he said. "Write our story, Sarah, make it something beautiful." She leaned over and kissed him, careful not to wake the baby. "I will, I promise." Over the next year, as Ethan grew from a tiny infant into a curious, active toddler, Sarah worked on her project. She would write during Ethan's naps and in the evenings after he went to bed, slowly transforming years of journal entries into a coherent narrative. Sometimes she would read passages aloud to Elias, asking for his input or his memories of particular events. "Is this how you remember it?" she would ask. "When we first met, were you really as nervous as I describe here?" "More nervous," he would admit. "I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and I was convinced you would take one look at the ranch and get right back on that stagecoach." "Never," she would say. "I knew from the first day that I was home." The ranch prospered during those years. The cattle herd grew to 500 head, then 700. They bought more land from a neighbor who was retiring, expanding their territory and their water rights. Elias hired another hand, a young man named Pete who was learning the business and proving himself reliable. Sarah's garden produced more than they could use, and she began selling produce in town, adding her own income to the ranch's coffers. They talked about having more children, but it took longer than it had with Ethan. Sarah suffered a miscarriage in the second year after his birth, a loss that devastated them both. Elias held her while she cried, his own tears falling silently, and they grieved together for the child they had lost. But they did not give up hope, and eventually, when Ethan was nearly 3, Sarah became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first. Sarah was sick more often, tired more easily, and Elias worried constantly. But Martha was reassuring, and Sarah herself insisted that she was fine, just uncomfortable. "Every pregnancy is different," she told him. "Stop fussing." Their second child, another son they named Eric, was born in early spring. The birth was quicker than Ethan's had been, and afterward Sarah seemed to recover faster as well. Eric was a quieter baby than his brother had been, more content to watch the world around him with serious dark eyes. "We have 2 sons," Elias said wonderingly, holding Eric while Ethan climbed into Sarah's lap to meet his new brother. "2 healthy sons. I am the luckiest man alive." "We are both lucky," Sarah said, smiling down at Ethan as he tentatively touched Eric's tiny hand. "Look at what we have made together, Elias. Look at this family." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Ethan grew into a bright, energetic child who loved following his father around the ranch, mimicking his every move. Eric was quieter but equally curious, and he could often be found in the barn, watching the horses with rapt attention. Sarah continued to write, documenting their growing family and the evolution of the ranch. She also began teaching both boys to read and write as soon as they were old enough, determined that they would have every advantage education could provide. When Ethan was 6 and Eric was 3, they faced a drought that threatened everything they had built. The creek that had always run year-round began to dry up, and the grass turned brown and brittle. Elias spent weeks digging a well deeper into the ground, desperate to find water for his cattle and his family. It was back-breaking work, and he came home each evening covered in dirt and sweat, so exhausted he could barely eat before falling into bed. Sarah supported him however she could, managing the household and the children alone, bringing him food and water in the fields, and never once complaining about the fear they both felt. One night, as they lay in bed too worried to sleep, she said, "We will survive this. We have survived everything else. We are stronger together than any challenge that comes our way." "I hope you are right," he said. "I am always right," she replied, and he laughed despite his worry. The well finally struck water at 50 feet, and Elias could have wept with relief. They installed a pump and set up a watering system for the cattle, and gradually the crisis passed. The following spring brought good rains and the land recovered. But the drought had taught them the fragility of their existence, and they made changes to ensure they would be better prepared next time. They invested in irrigation for the garden and created more storage for water. They diversified their income, breeding horses as well as cattle, so that they were not dependent on a single source of revenue. Through it all, Sarah continued to write, filling journal after journal with the story of their life. She also began to share some of her writing with others, publishing occasional pieces in the territorial newspaper about ranch life and the challenges facing settlers. Her articles were well received, and she developed a small reputation as a thoughtful commentator on the issues of the day. "You should write a book," Elias told her one evening after reading her latest article. "A real book, not just journals, something that could be published and distributed widely." "Perhaps someday," she said, "but for now I am content to document our story. That feels important enough." When Ethan was 8, he asked his mother about the ink stains on her fingers, which had been a constant throughout his life. "Why are your fingers always marked?" he wanted to know. "Do not other people's mothers have clean hands?" Sarah laughed and showed him how she made her ink from pokeweed berries, a skill she had learned from her own mother. "Writing is important work," she told him. "These stains are a mark of that work, and I wear them proudly." "What do you write about?" Eric asked. He was 5 now, old enough to be curious about his mother's constant scribbling. "I write about us," Sarah said. "About how your father and I met and fell in love and built this ranch. About the day each of you were born and all the funny and wonderful things you do. Someday, when you are grown, you will be able to read these journals and know exactly how much you were loved." Both boys seemed satisfied with this answer, and Elias felt his heart swell with love for his wife and sons. They were his entire world, these 3 people, and everything he did was for them. More years passed, and the children continued to grow. Ethan developed a passion for ranching that matched his father's, and by the time he was 12, he was a competent horseman and a genuine help with the cattle. Eric's interest lay more with the horses they bred, and he had a gentle way with the animals that suggested he might become an excellent trainer someday. Sarah continued to teach them, and both boys were reading at levels well beyond their years. The territory changed around them as well. The railroad had reached Wilcox when Sarah first arrived in 1882, and in the years since, the town had grown and modernized. There was talk of statehood, of Arizona becoming part of the Union rather than just a territory. The wild, lawless days of the frontier were fading, replaced by a more settled and civilized society. It was both a relief and a loss, Elias thought, this slow transformation of the world he had known. When Ethan was 14 and Eric was 11, Sarah completed her manuscript. She had been working on it for over 10 years, compiling and organizing her journals into a single, coherent narrative. The final product was over 300 pages, a complete account of their romance from the day she stepped off that stagecoach with stained fingertips to the present day. She gave it to Elias to read one evening, handing him the thick stack of papers with a mixture of pride and nervousness. "This is our story," she said. "I have tried to be honest and fair, to capture not just the good times but also the struggles. I hope you like it." He read it over the course of a week, staying up late each night to devour page after page. It was strange and wonderful to see their life through her eyes, to read her private thoughts about moments he remembered, to understand her perspective on events he had only experienced from his own viewpoint. She had captured their courtship with tenderness and humor, their early marriage with honesty about both the joys and the adjustments, the births of their children with raw emotion that made him tear up. She had documented the drought, the expansion of the ranch, the small daily moments that made up a life together. When he finally finished, he found her in the kitchen, and he pulled her into his arms. "It is perfect," he said. "You have made something truly beautiful, Sarah. Our great-grandchildren will read this someday and know exactly who we were, how much we loved each other." She cried then and kissed him, and they held each other for a long time. "What will you do with it now?" he asked when they finally pulled apart. "I am going to have it bound properly," she said. "And then I am going to put it somewhere safe so that it will last. This is our legacy, Elias. This story of how two strangers became a family. This is what we will leave behind." They celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1902, and the entire town of Wilcox turned out for the party. Elias and Sarah had become pillars of the community over the years, respected for their hard work and their generosity. The ranch was one of the most successful in the territory, and their sons were growing into fine young men. As Elias danced with his wife under the stars, he marveled at the journey they had taken together. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked her. "That day when you stepped off the stagecoach, did you ever imagine we would build all of this?" "No," she admitted. "I hoped for stability and partnership, but I could not have imagined the depth of love I would feel for you. You have exceeded every expectation, Elias Edwards. And you have been the greatest gift of my life, Sarah Edwards. These 20 years have been the best I could have hoped for." They kissed as their sons and friends cheered, and Elias thought that he had never been happier. More years continued to unfold, each one adding new layers to their story. Ethan fell in love at 18 with a neighbor's daughter named Clara, and they were married a year later. Eric, always quieter and more reserved, took longer to find his path, but eventually he met a young woman named Lily who shared his love of horses, and they too were wed. Sarah and Elias became grandparents, first to Ethan's daughter Anna, then to Eric's twin sons, James and Joseph. The ranch was large enough now to support both sons and their families, and they built 2 additional houses on the property, creating a small family compound. Sarah loved having her grandchildren close by, and she spent hours reading to them and teaching them to write, just as she had with their fathers. Her hair had gone gray, and her face showed the lines of a life well lived, but her green eyes were as bright as ever, and her fingers still bore the ink stains of her constant writing. Elias's hair had gone white, and his joints ached on cold mornings, but he was still strong enough to work alongside his sons. He took pride in what they had accomplished together, the way the ranch had grown from a modest operation to one of the largest and most successful in the territory. Arizona had achieved statehood in 1912, and Elias had lived to see the wild frontier of his youth transformed into a proper state with laws and infrastructure and opportunities he could never have imagined. On their 40th wedding anniversary, Sarah presented him with a revised and expanded version of their story. She had continued to document their life over the years, adding chapters about their sons' childhoods, the expansion of the ranch, the arrival of grandchildren. The manuscript was now over 600 pages, a complete chronicle of their 40 years together. "This is our life," she said as she gave it to him. "All of it, the beautiful and the difficult, the ordinary and the extraordinary. I want you to have it, Elias, because none of it would have existed without you." He held the massive tome in his hands and felt the weight of it, not just the physical weight, but the weight of all those years, all those memories, all that love. "You have given me so much," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever deserved. I love you, Sarah. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," she replied. "You asked me to document our romance all those years ago, and I have done my best. But the real romance is not in these pages, Elias. It is in the life we have lived together. That is the story that matters. They celebrated surrounded by their family, children and grandchildren filling the house with noise and laughter. As Elias looked around at the people they had created and the home they had built, he felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever time they had left, they would face it together as they always had. Sarah continued to write for as long as her hands would allow, documenting the ongoing story of their family as it grew and changed. When arthritis finally made holding a pen too painful, she dictated to her granddaughter Anna, who had inherited her love of words and writing. The story continued to unfold, generation after generation adding their chapters to the family narrative. Elias lived to see his great-grandchildren, tiny babies who bore the features of both him and Sarah, mixed with those of their other ancestors. He held them carefully, marveling at the fact that these children existed because 45 years ago, a woman with stained fingertips had stepped off a stagecoach and agreed to take a chance on a lonely rancher. They spent their final years in comfortable companionship, sitting together on the porch as the sun set, watching their family work the land they had built together. Sarah would rest her head on his shoulder, and he would hold her hand, and they would talk or simply sit in peaceful silence, content in each other's presence. When Elias passed away in 1927 at the age of 72, he died in his sleep with Sarah beside him, her ink-stained fingers clasped in his. His last conscious thought was of that first day, seeing her step off the stagecoach and thinking that she might be the answer to every prayer he had never known how to voice. He had been right. Sarah lived another 3 years, and she spent much of that time working with Anna to prepare the family chronicle for future generations. They had it professionally bound and printed, creating copies for each branch of the family. On the dedication page, Sarah wrote, "To Elias Edwards, who asked me to document our romance and gave me a story worth telling. Every word is written with love." She passed away quietly in the spring of 1930, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had known nothing but love from her. In her final moments, she smiled and whispered, "I am coming, Elias," and then she was gone. They were buried together on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by a simple stone that read, "Elias and Sarah Edwards, beloved parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents." They built a legacy of love, but their true legacy was not in the stone or even in the thriving ranch that continued for generations. It was in the hundreds of pages Sarah had written over 5 decades, documenting every detail of their romance and their life together. Their descendants would read those pages and know exactly how much they had loved each other, exactly how a chance decision and a stagecoach journey had created an entire family tree. The chronicle was passed down through the family, treasured and protected, and new chapters were added by each generation. Anna continued her grandmother's tradition, documenting her own life and the lives of her siblings. Her children did the same, and their children after them. The story that had begun with stained fingertips and a rancher's unusual request became a testament to the power of love and the importance of preserving our stories. Decades later, when the ranch was still operating and still owned by Edwards' descendants, a historian doing research on Arizona frontier families discovered Sarah's chronicle in the family's archives. He recognized immediately the historical value of such a detailed, intimate account of ranch life in the territorial days, and he asked permission to publish excerpts in an academic journal. The family agreed, and Sarah's words reached an audience she had never imagined. Readers were captivated by the love story at the heart of the chronicle, by Sarah's honest and vivid prose, by the window she had opened into a vanished world. The journal published her account of that first meeting in Wilcox, when Elias had noticed her stained fingertips and asked her to document their romance. That single article generated so much interest that a publisher approached the family about releasing the full chronicle as a book. The family debated for months about whether to share something so personal with the world. But ultimately, they decided that Sarah and Elias would have wanted their story told, would have wanted others to know that love and partnership could thrive even in the hardest of circumstances, that two strangers could build a life together that would resonate through generations. The book, titled Stained Fingertips, A Chronicle of Love in the Arizona Territory, was published in 1978, nearly 50 years after Sarah's death, and nearly a century after that fateful day in Wilcox. It became a surprise bestseller, beloved by readers who were moved by the tenderness and honesty of Sarah's voice, by the portrait she painted of a man who had loved her deeply and well, by the proof that ordinary lives could be extraordinary when lived with intention and love. The original ranch house was eventually turned into a museum, preserved by the family as a memorial to their ancestors. Visitors could walk through the rooms where Elias and Sarah had lived, see the desk where Sarah had written her journals, stand on the porch where they had spent so many evenings talking and dreaming. The manuscript itself, all 600 pages in Sarah's careful handwriting with those distinctive ink stains on every page, was kept in a climate-controlled case in the main room, open to the page where she had described their wedding day. And so the story that had begun with a simple request, "Document our romance," became immortal. Elias and Sarah's love lived on not just in their descendants, but in the hearts of everyone who read Sarah's words and understood that true romance is not just the passionate beginning, but the daily choice to love and be loved, to build a life together brick by brick, word by word, moment by moment. The ranch still operates to this day, now in its 7th generation of Edwards ownership. The cattle still graze on the same grassland that Elias first claimed in 1875, and the creek he fought so hard to protect still runs year-round. The family still gathers there for reunions and holidays, and they still tell the story of Elias and Sarah, keeping their memory alive through the same kind of oral tradition that Sarah had feared would let their story be lost. But thanks to her foresight and her stained fingertips and her daily dedication to documenting their life together, the story was never lost. It lives on in published form, in family legend, in the very land itself, which remembers the love that shaped it. And if you visit the museum on a quiet day, when the Arizona sun is setting and painting the sky in those same shades of orange and gold that Elias and Sarah watched together for so many years, you can almost feel their presence still. You can almost see Sarah sitting at her desk by the window, her ink-stained fingers moving across the page, capturing one more moment of the romance that began the day a mail-order bride arrived in Wilcox, and a rancher asked her to write it all down. Their love story continues to inspire, generation after generation, proof that the best romances are the ones built on respect and partnership, and the daily decision to choose each other, again and again and again.